Hey everybody, it's Chip Harris with Hillcrest Realty Group in North Carolina. I wanted to follow up with you on the National Association of Realtors settlement in regard to broker commission and compensation in regard to sellers and buyers, and who pays commission and who pays the realtor or doesn't pay the realtor. So very confusing type of circumstance if you're not well read on it, and most consumers have seen highlights and headlines, but maybe don't understand what's going on in terms of this settlement and what it means if you're looking to sell a house or if you're looking to buy a house and you may or may not want representation from a real estate agent or realtor on that. So this is how I understand it to date. And I will say this, realtors, almost weekly, if not daily, we are getting updates on what it means for us and how to accomplish our job on your behalf as the consumer, as a seller or a buyer, in the right way, according to these settlement rules that have come down from the Department of Justice. And so to that end, the first thing I'm going to say is I am disappointed in this settlement, primarily because I feel like, as a professional who helps consumers both sell and buy real estate, which is a very difficult transaction, it's a very expensive transaction for most people, and it's a little bit daunting and intimidating. I feel like this settlement will eventually drive many home buyers, especially some sellers, but many buyers, to decide perhaps not to seek representation from a real estate agent. I think this decision will ultimately hurt consumers, and I think it is bad for real estate in the United States, because this is not just in North Carolina. It's not just where I live. This is nationwide. These folks, these lawyers, judges, and juries who have never sold real estate in their lives, in many cases, have sat around tables and decided what's best for the consumer and what's best for the real estate industry. That's my high horse. Now I'm going to get off of that and simply say, we're here to help you, and this is how we can do it. So number one, there's not a lot of change with this settlement situation. I think it's a lot of bluster and it's a lot of intimidation around consumers and around real estate professionals, from the feds and from the Justice Department. And to that end, people will still sell houses, people still buy houses, and still need and want representation from professionals who have done that hundreds and hundreds of times in their careers and can help create smooth, accurate transactions for people. That's what we're here to do. So number one, biggest change from a real estate perspective or realtor perspective is we can no longer advertise if commission or compensation is being shared with a buyer's agent. If I'm a listing agent, I can no longer publish on the MLS or any other MLS related site what my firm is willing to share as far as compensation goes with a buyer's agent. It can't be published. And so around that, now, instead of it being transparent and knowing exactly what we're working towards here in terms of compensation as a professional, or in terms of potentially how much a buyer client may need to pay their real estate agent out of pocket or not, we have to kind of go through some channels to communicate more effectively and more often with other realtors. For example, if I represent a buyer now, and this has always been the case. Nothing's really changed here outside of the fact that the amount of money I may get paid as an advocate for my buyer client is no longer published. So I can't just see it and say, oh, okay, they're paying X in percentage of sale price if I bring a successful transaction for my buyer to close. I have to now reach out to every listing agent for every property and determine whether or not their seller or their firm are offering compensation to me as the buyer's agent for my buyer. Now, our buyer's agency agreement has in North Carolina, our buyer's agency agreement has always, or at least over the last 10 years, described as a buyer hires us what our firm expects to be paid in compensation and how it's paid and who pays it. So that's the whole basis of this lawsuit. And that is something North Carolina forms have always included and always had, and we've always gone over with our clients. That's not the case in every state, and I think that's been the problem. But in North Carolina, we are very transparent with our buyers, how much money, how much compensation as a buyer's agent we expect, or our firm expects to be paid at a successful closed transaction. And so around that, if we expect to be paid through our buyer's agency agreement X percent of sales price, and we call a listing agent now, or even have had it seen on MLS in the past, which is not the case anymore, but now we don't see it. It's not transparent. We have to investigate and call a little bit further on every property to determine if they're offering commission or some kind of compensation to a buyer's agent. Then say my buyer's agent agreement, my buyer has agreed that, okay, yes, Hillcrest Realty Group, for example, is being is expected to be compensated X. I call the listing agent and they say, well, my seller and now my firm as well have agreed to offer Y, and maybe Y is less than X. And so to that end, what that means is if the difference between X on the buyer side and Y that's being offered by the seller or the listing agent or firm, if Y is less than X, whatever the difference is, in theory, the buyer has to come out of pocket at closing to pay that difference, right? So in my belief, it's a fact in my belief that the Department of Justice is really pushing hard for sellers and listing firms to stop offering compensation to buyer's agents through the seller and then through the listing firm. And they're expecting in the future for buyers to take the brunt of, or the heavy load of, paying their buyer representative, their buyer agent representative, out of their pocket at closing. Now, I know, and most real estate professionals know, and I think you know as consumers, that in many cases, especially first-time home buyers, protected class home buyers, low-income home buyers, some medium-income home buyers, and maybe more, sometimes barely scrape enough money together in their accounts to create a down payment circumstance where they can become a homeowner and achieve the American dream of home ownership, which then also helps propel them to grow their wealth. Without home ownership, it is very difficult to grow wealth in this country if you're in the low to moderate income or even upper middle income range within the United States. Home equity growth is a huge factor in wealth building. And my belief is that this is going to hurt people from being able to accomplish that goal. 2 years ago, I made a video and I called it Becoming a Renter Nation. And I do believe in my heart that this country will become a renter's nation over a period of the next 5 years, if things don't change. If buyers are expected to pay their buyer's agent the compensation that buyer's agents typically expect, many of them will not be able to afford to do that. And what does that mean? They will either forego representation and be hurt through a transaction where they are negotiating with an experienced listing agent who may take advantage of the fact that these buyers are unrepresented and have never purchased a home or haven't purchased many homes in their lives, and they don't know exactly how to proceed through a transaction smoothly and to their advantage. I think it's a disservice. I think it's a really huge disservice to consumers, especially buyer consumers, that this settlement perhaps may cause more buyers to go unrepresented and just simply call the for sale sign in the yard, talk to the agent who's representing the seller, the other side, and not go represented in buying a property. And sometimes those will go smoothly. Sometimes they'll go as the buyer expected. Other times, they may not even know what type of home inspections to ask for or what to do throughout the transaction that may completely disadvantage them in the sale of the transaction. They end up spending more. They end up going through heartache. They end up potentially there may be real estate commission issues because buyers feel like they got quote unquote cheated or didn't have the representation that they needed to have when they chose not to have a realtor help them. But if buyers have to come out of pocket and pay the realtor that X that's on a buyer's agency agreement, whatever that firm policy is around their compensation, then they're just going to get hurt. I'm telling you, over the long haul, consumers are going to be in a disadvantage here. So, that's a bad thing. That's a bad thing. But that is the consequence of bad rulings and bad law. It's out there. We all know it's out there in other ways too. But this is the most recent thing in my profession that's come down. Now, I believe right now, most of the time, it's going to be business as usual from a perspective of, I believe sellers will see the value in offering what the listing agent is advising them to pay in terms of compensation to that listing firm, so that then it'd be enough for the listing firm to decide to share part of that commission or that compensation with a buyer's agent if they bring a buyer to the table and go to a successful close. I think most of the time that's going to continue as normal, and the buyers will be spared having to pay, if not a portion, the entire commission or compensation to their representative agent, realtor agent. So to circle back to the listing side, as sellers, you have a choice. You can either offer to pay compensation to the listing firm, which they can then cooperate and share with a buyer's agent, or you can choose to simply offer to compensate a buyer's agent directly, not through the firm that you're helping you sell your property, but directly, meaning you're offering to pay the listing firm who you've hired to sell your home X, and you're also willing to pay a buyer's agent a compensation amount of X, but more directly and not through the firm that's listing it for you, as has most of the time traditionally been the case. Or as a seller, you have the right to hire a listing firm to list your property and simply say, I choose not to have you share your compensation with a buyer's agent, or I do not want to hire, or I do not want to pay to support or compensate a buyer's agent. And so to that end, when I, as the buyer's agent, call that listing agent and say, hey, I'm getting ready to show your house, is the seller or is your firm offering compensation to me? I'm bringing a buyer and they may be interested in this house. And they say, no, the seller is not willing to pay a buyer's agent, and he did not, he's not allowing us to share our compensation with a buyer's agent. So your buyer is expected to pay you if you're going to get paid at all. And I'll tell you, folks, I don't know a realtor out there that works as a nonprofit agency, and I don't know of a realtor out there as an entrepreneur, as a person who has to pay bills at their household, or pay for their car payment, or pay for their kids' college education, who can afford to just simply go out there and work for free, unfortunately. So we're not pro bono people. We have to make a living. We have to wear clothes and pay bills and everything like everybody else. And this is how we do it. This is our living. And so what do? We go back to the buyer's agency agreement that our buyer signed, contracting us and hiring us as the firm to represent them. And we say, well, remember the buyer's agency agreement? Now, this house in particular has decided that they're not going to pay us. So that clause in your buyer agency agreement that says that we expect to be paid X will fall on you at closing. And that's this amount of money if we make this offer on this house. So it's well disclosed to the buyer how much they may have to come out of pocket to pay for their representation. And you just really hope and pray that they can afford to pay it. And that's an education conversation that has to be had on the front end with every buyer client who is looking for a home in any price range or property in any price range. We have got to very effectively and transparently communicate, and that's down to every single house that we show them as professionals. This is what this means. This is what, again, the buyer's agency agreement says, that we will be compensated, and this in particular house is paying Y, this particular house is paying X, this particular house, seller is paying Z, and here's the differences on all these that you'll be responsible for at closing in terms of compensating us as the buyer's agents and buyer agent firm. Is it clear as mud? I mean, it's just, it's very interesting, I think. Now, I will say that's always been the case. It's always been the case. It's just a lot more fact digging and documentation and everything else, which, work is work. We don't mind more documentation. We don't mind more fact finding around things like that. It's just a shame that I feel like through this settlement, there was an opportunity and it was missed. The opportunity was not to become less transparent with how much a seller or a listing firm is willing to compensate a buyer's agent for bringing a buyer to a successful close on that property, which it is now. It's less transparent because we can't see it online. We have to call around and dig around, hope we can get a hold of people and find out if their seller is willing to offer compensation or not, things like that. What should have happened, in my opinion, it's a very humble opinion because I may be way off base and maybe way wrong, but in my small-minded, logical, commonsensical thought process, wouldn't it have been more consumer-friendly and transactionally friendly and less confusing if instead of taking transparency away online, we added it? Meaning, in the past, in the MLS, I'm sitting here looking at my computer like you can see it. In the MLS, we could go on to each house listing and see what was being offered in terms of compensation to a buyer's agent. Now that's gone, so less transparent. But what would have happened if we left that field in MLS, but also made a change to add it to the public view? So instead of it being taken away, keep it on there and just make it public. Hey, this house is offering X in compensation to a buyer's agent if if we come to a successful close. This property is offering Y. Buyers have a right to see that, and I think instead of hearing it from us as their buyer representative, as their agent, instead of hearing it on each individual house, I'm calling, I'm finding out, let me get that, if it was just public and it syndicated through MLS to Zillow, Realtor.com, Trulia, Redfin, all these other syndicated third-party sites where everybody searches for homes, including our own company websites, wouldn't it have made a lot more sense for everybody just to see it right there? This seller is offering 0. That means my buyer has to come out of pocket to pay me 100% of what we expect to be paid. This seller is offering X. That means we're expecting Y, and here's the difference that you may have to come out of pocket with in closing. Folks, lack of transparency or taking things away is never the answer from a consumer protection perspective. It is simply adding it, making it more robust, getting it out into the public. That is what's consumer friendly, and that's what protects consumers. That's the way it should have been before, and that's the way it should be now. Again, that's my simple mind sharing its simple opinion, which may be right or wrong. It's up to you. But if you're frustrated by the fact that that is not the case, maybe call your congressman, call your senator, call the real estate commission. Really has nothing to do with this. The real estate commission is all National Association of Realtors, but make your voice heard. I believe in public and consumer information, and I believe that information has become harder to achieve because of this settlement. So again, I'm on a soapbox today, but I think it's important. This is a very long video. It's 21 minutes, longer than I like to go, but I hope you hung with me through it. I think it's important to understand and know what's going on. There are other changes that have taken place through this National Association of Realtors settlement agreement with the Department of Justice and the court system, and all those attorneys that had something to do with it. But more of that to come later. I think I've hit you with enough today, and that's the crux of it. Thanks again. I hope you have a great day.